VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. Thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, our nation is in a financial crisis, and this crisis is worsening every single day. Our national debt is in excess of $16.5 trillion, much more well beyond that when you really look at where we stand financially. That debt translates down to every U.S. citizen, every man, woman, and child. That's right, every child born into the world today is born holding an IOU to the federal government in the amount of $52,450. The debate continues in Congress over such things as the budget, the debt ceiling, and something called the Sequester, which is due to take effect on March the 1st. Well, here to discuss the issue with us today is Bill Wilson. He's president of Americans for Limited Government. Their organization identifies, exposes, and works with Congress and state legislatures to prevent the continued expansion of government. Bill, thanks for joining us today here on Crosstalk.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I think it's important for us to just set a foundation for this sequester. Tell us exactly what is the sequester and what brought us to this point.
Sure. Back in August of 2011, Congress was debating, and there was a huge fight over whether or not to increase the debt ceiling, which is, in the most basic terms, it's the credit limit on the national credit card. And the president had asked for an additional $2.1 trillion in spending authority. There was a great deal of opposition to it, and the impasse was finally broken by an idea that came from the White House that the Republicans in the House and Senate accepted, which said that, okay, we're going to approve it in three steps, and we're going to take a couple of months and try to work out a deal. But if we can't work out a deal, then on January 1 of 2013, we are going to have automatically spending cuts that would total $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And that it would be half in defense and half in non-defense parts of government. And then they exempted Social Security and some others. I mean, interestingly, they exempted the welfare program Medicaid, but did not exempt Medicare for senior citizens. But that was it. And the thinking was that such cuts would be so draconian and so frightening that the politicians would agree to a deal. Well, as we all are aware, they didn't agree to anything, and they have been unable to really find a middle ground on how to deal with a truly out-of-control spending. And so here we are now at the sequester. And I think the first question that oftentimes you'll hear some of the president's supporters say, well, we don't really have a spending problem. So to put this all in perspective, from the beginning of the United States until the year 2000, when Bill Clinton handed the government over to George W. Bush, we had amassed a debt of about $5.5 trillion over that 220 years. In the 8 years from 2001 to 2009, when George Bush handed the government over to Barack Obama, he doubled the debt. We went from $5.5 trillion to $10 trillion in debt. And in 4 years of Barack Obama, we have gone from $10 trillion in debt to $16 trillion in debt, heading to 20. And so when you start to see that Bush doubled what had happened from 220 years prior, and that now Obama is on line to double that again, you come to an understanding of just how deeply in debt we have become and how we are on a line that frankly, can only lead in a really bad situation and crash.
Bill, you had mentioned a date of January 1st, and that date's come and gone. We keep hearing about things taking effect on March the 1st.
Right.
What's that discrepancy there?
Well, what happened was that as we hit the fiscal cliff in December, which was when the sequester was going to take place and all sorts of taxes were going to rise. And if you remember, we had this very, very difficult and contentious fight in December, right up to Christmas. Part of that agreement was to kick the can down the road, to give a 2-month reprieve of the sequester to try and work things out again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they didn't really tell people is that on those 2 months, they just said, you know what, we're not going to cut spending on that. We're just going to forget about that. And we're going to spend as if there were no cuts. So you've already had 18%, or 2 months out of the year, of the cuts that had been promised the American people in exchange for the debt ceiling increase. You've already had them take that back.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, what you hear from the president is that, well, we can't possibly allow these to happen. It will be the end of the world as we know it.
Well, since the State of the Union address, I mean, the president repeatedly has been blaming Congress for passing the sequester, which Congress did. But wasn't this the president's idea? Isn't he the one that signed it into law?
Most certainly. Not only did he sign it into law, it was his idea. And we have that not from John Boehner or from any Republican. We have that from the Democratic chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Max Baucus, who says, oh, yeah, that was Obama's idea. And we have it from Bob Woodward, extreme liberal columnist for the Washington Post, who in his book said that this was Obama's idea to get around the debt ceiling fight. And that there's so many angles on this problem that we're facing, but one of them, Barack Obama never seems to be responsible for anything. He never takes responsibility. He is the spoiled child who always has an excuse, and it's always somebody else's fault, never his. And it's now gone from not just being tiresome and, tiresome. It's now becoming downright dangerous to the country.
I mean, yeah, Jay Carney recently, his press secretary, said the effect of the sequester would be severe. It would go right to American families. Americans will lose their jobs because Republicans made a choice for that to happen.
Yeah. And see, that's the other part of it here. That White House is always in campaign mode. They are never doing the job to which the American people elected them. They're always fighting and trying to gain advantage. And unfortunately, the Republicans, especially in the House, act as if they're trying to negotiate and do a deal and try to fix the problem. And they don't seem to understand or accept the fact that this man doesn't want to fix the problem. He's in a fight. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's something else. We keep hearing all these horror stories of what will happen to America should the sequester take effect. Tuesday of this week, the president was speaking to a group. He was flanked by a number of emergency responders. I have a brief clip I'd like to play and then get your response here to it.
Sure.
Now, if Congress allows this meat cleaver approach to take place, it will jeopardize our military readiness. It will eviscerate job-creating investments in education and energy and medical research. It won't consider whether we're cutting some bloated program that has outlived its usefulness or a vital service that Americans depend on every single day. It doesn't make those distinctions. Emergency responders, like the ones who are here today, their ability to help communities respond to and recover from disasters will be degraded. Border Patrol agents will see their hours reduced. FBI agents will be furloughed. Federal prosecutors will have to close cases and let criminals go. Air traffic controllers and airport security will see cutbacks, which means more delays at airports across the country. Thousands of teachers and educators will be laid off. Tens of thousands of parents will have to scramble to find child care for their kids. Hundreds of thousands of Americans will lose access to primary care and preventive care like flu vaccinations and cancer screenings. And already the threat of these cuts has forced the Navy to delay an aircraft carrier that was supposed to deploy to the Persian Gulf. And as our military leaders have made clear, changes like this, not well thought through, not phased in properly, changes like this affect our ability to respond to threats in unstable parts of the world.
The sky is falling, Bill.
There are so many. Well, first off, just before I let this one drop, the president says that, you're not allowing us to make a distinction between vital programs and, his words, bloated programs that have outlived their usefulness. Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. President, I will guarantee, I don't have a vote in Congress, but I will guarantee you that if you will supply us a list of bloated programs that have outlived their usefulness, we can have them repealed and done in a day. But I have yet to hear a single bloated program that's outlived its usefulness that this president thinks exists. Secondly, this whole idea of meat cleaver versus the ability to pick and choose where you make the savings. Most of the spending in the discretionary field, and certainly in the Pentagon, is at the discretion of the executive. There aren't mandatory. You do not have mandatory grants to egghead ivory tower universities to do grants for studies that will never produce any value. You do not have a mandatory issuance of green energy grants to companies that end up going bankrupt and the money disappear, like in Solyndra and a dozen other examples at the Department of Energy under this president. And so he has the authority to do what he claims he doesn't. But just to make things crystal clear, twice the House of Representatives in the last month have passed legislation and sent to the Senate that explicitly states that the administration has the power and authority to make selective cuts, to make those value judgment decisions. And both of those pieces of legislation have been shoved in a drawer by Democrat left-winger Harry Reid, never to see the light of day. So the president complains about a method of cuts that he himself and his allies are ensuring happens.
Yeah.
And, so you have to assume that they want those cuts to happen that way to punish the American people.
So he could simply push Congress, pass a bill, which the House has already done, transfer those funds from less important federal accounts into more important federal accounts, and that would take care of the sky is falling message from the president.
Absolutely.
Wow. We're going to take a quick 60-second break and be back with more here about the sequester. What is truth? Bill Wilson, our guest here today from Americans for Limited Government. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation scientist and author at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, we've seen that some animals use tools. Does this imply that man came from the animals?
Chris, to an evolutionist, everything implies that man came from the animals. Consider this example. Archaeologists have found stone tools in Africa that they believe were made and used by chimpanzees long ago. Chimpanzees are known to do the very same thing today. But does this imply evolution? No, to me it just implies that chimpanzees have always used rocks to bash open nuts. There's no evolutionary connection here at all. And that's the point. Apes have always been apes, able to do ape things, and humans have always been humans. There's no evidence that they came from a common ancestor, and that's the way it is back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more information, visit us on the web at icr.org. I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
Folks, I hope you listened to what the president said here as it relates to sequester, something that, remember, he initiated. He got the ball rolling on it. He's the one who signed it into law, and continuing to point his finger at that nasty Congress for having passed this, and all kinds of horror things to happen. We're speaking today with Bill Wilson, president of Americans for Limited Government. Horror things where tens of thousands of parents, Bill, are going to wonder, what are we going to do for daycare today? Teachers across this nation are going to be laid off. He talked about prosecutors having to close the cases that they're involved with, letting criminals run free here across the nation.
It is a level of scare tactic, and it really is demeaning. It's demeaning to the office of president. It's demeaning to Barack Obama as an individual, that he would say such a thing and treat the American people with such disdain and disregard. The fact of the matter is, on March 1, there are not going to be a sudden halt. There will not be instantly all these terrible things happen a week from tomorrow. There are money in the accounts. The federal government doesn't know where all of its money is, let alone be able to pinpoint it to a specific day. And so it is an absurdity, and it's designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that's scare people. And scaring people, they hope enough that they can then buffalo the politicians, elected representatives, into handing them all of this spending power back. Well, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's called deception of the people, and certainly that's what we're seeing take place, because this is, in my opinion, very broad deception taking place. Here we have the president saying, that the Congress is not, exercising, these bloated programs. We talked about that just before the break here, and he keeps talking, though, at the same time, and even in the same speech, about making the rich pay their fair share. He said it's the same thing we heard, or it's the same thing we just heard, a couple months ago, in which the House relented and let the president raise taxes.
Right.
We thought they were done. They thought they were done with that argument. We thought we were done with that argument. But now we keep hearing that issue come forth again. And I think there was another quote accusing Republicans of not asking nothing of the wealthiest Americans or the biggest corporations. So the burden about the sequester, the burden is going to fall on the first responders, on seniors, on the middle class families.
It is, again. I mean, unless and until Republican leaders stand up and call him out on this out and out lie and, frankly, painful distortion, then he's going to keep trying to get away with it.
Where are the Republican leaders on this? I mean,
it is a very good question. I wish I knew. It has been very disheartening to watch the, I would have to say, almost quibbling response to this. There are, the president, the point we made earlier, the president dares to use the term bloated and outdated federal programs. Mm-hmm. He won't come up with any. Why won't the House? Why doesn't the House every single day pass a bill to kill a program and send it to the Senate? That's what I believe should happen. And there are growing numbers of junior members of the House that feel that way as well.
Senator Rand Paul is calling this sequester a pittance. That's a far cry from what we're hearing from the president.
Yeah.
And I've heard others said that we're really just reducing spending, like 2 to 3 cents on a dollar. We're not really cutting anything. We're just reducing the amount of increase. Is that accurate?
Exactly, and that is, Senator Paul has been one of the few who has really stood up and belled the cat on this thing and been relentless, and the more exposure he can get, the better. There are 2 years, 2013, 2014, where there are less dollars spent in programs than the year before. But that had already been planned on to a large degree. And in that environment, all we're doing is cutting about $115 billion. of money that we would have spent that we are slated not to spend. From that point forward, the budgets all increase, and we are only reducing the amount of the planned increase. That's it. We're not cutting anything. And all we're doing is saying that in the year 2015, I was going to spend $100, so now I'm only going to increase my spending by $98. This is a total reduction of authority, not of real money spending, but of budget authority of 2.5%.
Yeah.
That's it.
You know, I think of a family that spends $100 a week on groceries, saying, you know, we're going to have to tighten our belts, or we're going to have a major cutback in the groceries for our home. We probably are going to throw all the grocery stores out of business. We're probably going to have to experience a little starvation because this week we can only spend $97 or $98.
This week.
Yeah,
but next week it'll be okay. We'll spend $102.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect analogy of what this president is saying and what we're really looking at.
Americans for Limited Government is actually urging the House not to reduce what remains of the sequester cuts. What will happen if the House caves, and should I use the term again?
Well, he'd be accurate. If the House caves again and gives in to this president, allows this thing, the amount of spending to go forward, then there are several things. One, the trajectory of spending that gets us to that $20 trillion debt will accelerate. We'll get there much faster. The pressure on the underlying financial system is going to start to grow. But I think the first reaction you're going to see is political, not economic. And the political ramifications are going to be that the people who put Congress in, you know, let's remember, 2 short years ago, in 2010, Republicans won the largest election in 70 years. They had the most number of seats they had ever won in one setting since the 1800s. They swept state houses and governorships. They had a massive rejection of Obama, and they did it on a pledge of cutting back on the size of government. If they cave in, then I believe that they have abandoned their mandate for leadership, and I would expect to see them replaced by the Democrats in the 2014 elections.
Bill, when it comes to this area of spending, it just seems like this Congress, the president, just don't get it. I mean, every normal family realizes what their income is, what their expenses are, when they have to make adjustments to make their home budgets meet. Anybody would be put in prison if they did what our Congress and president are doing.
They would. And it is partially... There's partially ideological issues here, but the biggest problem, Republican and Democrat, is that freed up of any economic restraint, and when we can print money at will, just print it into existence, then the power that is associated with that becomes, I think, like a drug or alcohol. I think you become drunk on this power and ability to have anything you want by merely printing it on paper and saying it shall be.
Yeah, or minting a $1 trillion coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the mentality that even could come up with an idea like that and say that this is a credible idea, that tells you where they are. They're divorced from reality, and they can get away with it for a while because they have the military, and most people are busy leading their lives and raising their families and aren't paying attention. But the history of the world is that type of approach cannot last, and that it always ends the same way, in ruin. And it's not just recent history. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Roman Empire and before, that when you do this, when you just print wildly and debase your currency, that medium of exchange, it always leads in a collapse. And that's where I believe these people are taking us.
When do you believe we'll get to the point of no return, or do you believe we've gotten there already?
I think I think we are at the point of no return in the sense that there's no easy way out of this. I think that no matter what you do at this stage, there's going to be a great deal of pain. The question is, how can you minimize the pain and put us on a path that gets us to sound economics and sound fiscal policy as quickly as possible? Mm-hmm. And in that sense, a major step has to be the reduction of government spending, government debt, and allow the private economy to start doing what it does, which is generating jobs and generating capital and profits that then in turn generate taxes. But that is not going to happen in an environment where the value of that dollar in your pocket is being put into question, and where rules and regulations are drowning you and you don't know what the cost of a business is. These things are all leading to that zombie-like economy that Japan has been in for 20 years, and where unfortunately it appears as if we are headed.
Yeah. Bill, what is it that you're advising through Americans for Limited Government? What are you advising people across this nation do, the grassroots, as it relates to this issue?
I think that I would hope that the grassroots would tell their member of Congress and their senators to allow the sequester to take place, to look to make further cuts, and to slow the pace of this government and do the one thing that Barack Obama has been unwilling to do, and that's make adult choices on those things that we must have and those things that are luxuries or who have long outlived their usefulness, and then get rid of them. And that you have to do it in no uncertain terms. The other part of this, and we've kind of alluded to it on your question about what happens if they cave in the House, is that, for so long, we have been presented many times with the choices of the lesser of two evils. But when you get into that choice, you're picking evil. You're just picking maybe the softer, gentler way, but it is still wrong. And I think it's long past time that we start telling the politicians, no, I'm not going to pick the lesser of two evils. I either am going to pick what I think is the good, or I'm not going to pick. And I think you're seeing that. I think you saw that in the 2012 elections, and I think you're going to see more of it.
And, folks, the number that you can contact your House of Representatives, your congressman, 202-225-3121, 202-225-3121. Your senator can be reached through the Senate switchboard, 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121. For direct numbers to your senators, you can go to senate.gov. For your congressmen, your House members at house.gov. I'd like to open our phone lines to get your reaction to what you're hearing from our guest today and your thoughts about the sequester and where we're heading as a nation economically right now. Our toll-free number to crosstalk, 800-733-9829. We'll take your questions and comments, 800-733-9829.
If you were asked how you know the Bible is true, do you have an answer? We are living in an increasingly skeptical society, whether it comes to politics, science, or even faith. People see conflict everywhere, even about fundamental aspects of the Bible. Sadly, many church leaders are at odds about biblical truth and scriptural authority, leaving believers confused and uncertain, and in need of clear biblical teaching. In the books, How Do We Know the Bible is True?, editors Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge have compiled from numerous authors responses to many questions, such as, is the Bible totally without error? Did the resurrection really happen? How do we know the 66 books of the Bible are from God? And numerous other issues. Volume 1 or Volume 2 are available for a donation of $17 each, or both can be obtained for a donation of $30 to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
This is Crosstalk here on VCY America. We appreciate you joining us. I'm just talking here through the break on some of the things that are taking place here. A press release from concerning South Dakota here, folks. In South Dakota, Sequester will eliminate nearly 5,000 jobs. And then we get this warning on another thing. And, folks, we've got a lot of hot air that's going forth here, and we need to get to the truth as to what's going on. One other thing, Bill, we keep hearing, by the way, we're speaking with Bill Wilson, president of Americans for Limited Government. We keep hearing about another date of May 19th. Any significance to that date?
Yes. May 19th is when the Congress will once again have to deal with the debt ceiling. Right now we have authorized debt of $16.5 trillion. The administration has asked that it go to $18 trillion, but that only gets us past the 2014 election. Without question, this man is going to take us to $20 trillion by the end of his presidency. But that, again, will be another flashpoint where Congress will have to act or do something, and we'll be in another one of these crisis modes. And so increasingly, I hope the people are understanding that this propaganda machine that is driving now on all cylinders is going to be aimed right at your minds and your family's minds for the next 3 months. So now is the time to start picking it apart and looking at what's true and what's not.
Folks, there has to be cuts that take place here. I mean, I'm living in the state of Wisconsin. Governor Scott Walker just issued his budget address for the next 2 years. But 2 years ago, we were facing a $3.6 billion deficit here as a state. And Bill, he's turned that around within this 2-year budget period. Now that we had millions of dollars in surplus, that actually started putting money into a rainy day fund. But it takes tough choices and cuts and belt tightening in order for that to happen.
It does, and look at what Governor Walker had to suffer in order to do that. I mean, the mass demonstrations by those individuals who are living off of the tax money, the slurs, the attacks, the insults, the threats, recall elections. I mean, literally a year of just unmitigated torture that the left put him and his family and his supporters through. And yet, what Governor Walker taught, hopefully some Republicans and Democrats too, was that if you stand up for principle, you stand up for the right thing, and you don't blink, but you fight, you can win. And defeating organized labor in Wisconsin should tell anybody in other states that if Scott Walker can beat organized labor in Wisconsin, then you don't have anything to fear in your state.
Let's begin by going to Lat from Wisconsin here. Lat, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi, Jim and Bill.
Hey.
I just want to point out to your callers the main reason the government could turn this economy around, but Barack Obama is controlled by the UN 21 agenda, and they want to completely destroy the dollar. And until the dollar is destroyed, they can't get their new one world order and new world currency, and that's what people need to realize. And the second thing is, until we get rid of the Federal Reserve and the IRS, which is a corrupt entity, that's where that'll keep feeding the machine. We have to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and someone stands up to them. But we don't have any congressmen or Republicans and Democrats that will, because there's too much money involved in that.
Well,
so
there are some
those things get taken care of.
Yeah, there are some that are actually looking to even audit the Federal Reserve, and Bill, they've met resistance doing that.
Oh, yeah, the Federal Reserve, I mean, this is 100th anniversary this year. It has been a century, and, you know, when they were formed, they basically promised the American people when they were formed, we're going to be here to preserve the value of the dollar. That was their promise. And 100 years later, the dollar is worth 96.5% less.
Wow.
Than it was the day they were formed. So they haven't really done a very good job.
Let's go next to Christine. Go ahead. You're on the air.
I have two questions. It appears that on the liberal news there, I was reading a piece, anything on Yahoo News to me is slanted. Troops getting ready for getting their gear from charity as the U.S. military braces for budget cuts, and they're saying that the sequestrations are going to cause military readiness to be compromised, and they won't be able to maintain their equipment. You're saying these are all scare tactics. And also, my other question was, I've been calling my congressmen lately and my senators about just asking for them to start up some proceedings on impeachment. Is that even practical to think that could happen?
Thanks, Christine.
Okay. Let me take the second one first. I don't think that it is practical on impeachment because of this. The House could vote articles of impeachment, but with the Senate under the control of Harry Reid, it would never even get a hearing, let alone a vote. And so you would be asking our Republican members and conservatives in the House to take a vote that knowing that nothing would happen and that the Obama propaganda machine would turn against them. So it probably is not a realistic policy strategy and is not likely to even be given active consideration.
What about the military readiness thing? I mean, the president talked about an aircraft carrier being delayed going to the Gulf. We keep hearing about national defense being weakened. Troop readiness is going to suffer. Is that going to happen if sequester happens March 1st?
If it does, if our young men and women are harmed, it is the direct act of Barack Obama. Look, we have a situation where his Secretary of the Navy had two competing bids for a ship. And instead of choosing, do you know what Secretary of the Navy Maubus did? He awarded a contract to both of them. We'll just have two. Now, it increases the amount of support by hundreds of millions of dollars a year because you now have to have facilities to support and maintain two different ships. I grew up in a military family. You cannot tell me that there is not money to be cut in the military budget that doesn't affect that young PFC stationed out there defending this country in Afghanistan or around the world. If they hurt those young men and women, they're doing it out of spite, and they need to be held responsible for it.
Kathy is our next caller from Monroe. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. We keep talking about the budget and this debt, and why don't Washington, D.C. start off with themselves, with all these entitlements that our Congress, the senators get, our president, they don't talk about cutting back, with their luxuries, and then they also talk about this taxing the rich all the time. Well, I'm not quite sure what the tax code, for the very rich, but even if they was to raise it to say 40%, what they need to do is get rid of all these legal loopholes because they pay their taxes up front, but then they turn around and get it all back, or they do offshore investments, and so nothing stays here. We don't have very many manufacturing jobs here anymore. It's so overseas. So.
Even if we tax at 100% rate, Bill, it's still not enough.
Yeah. No, if you took the top 1% that they like to beat up on, Kathy, and you said we're going to have 100% tax, in fact, we're going to go one step further. We're going to take everything you've got. We're just going to take it. It wouldn't put a dent in this government. It's spending so much. You are right. The tax code has been written to make it cheaper, easier, and better for a businessman or an investor to build his jobs overseas than to do them here. Why do we have a tax structure that encourages business to hurt working families in this country? Makes no sense. And yet, that is the thing, that is the code and the policies that this government wants to defend. You are dead right about it. While they would say, the politicians here in Washington would say, well, we could give up this on our pay and this and that. It wouldn't amount to anything. It wouldn't even be a drop in the bucket. And they're right. It wouldn't be. But that doesn't excuse them from building a culture in D.C. that treats the rest of us like we're somehow their vassals, that we're supposed to bow down to them and give to them.
Yeah. And Bill, if I had a bucket that was filled with a drop for every time I heard a statement like that, we would have quite a full bucket.
You'd you'd need an extra bucket.
Yeah. Let's go to Christy in Mobile, Alabama. You're on the air, Christy.
Yes. I believe that the Word of God is true. And with that said, it does say the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord, and he turneth whithersoever he will. Mm-hmm. And so my thoughts this week and the last few weeks have been, as I've been crying out to God, is where is the church in this situation? Where is our responsibility? And and I will tell you honestly, this last weekend I was really just praying, and the Lord took me to Ezekiel. And I would just want to bring encouragement to the believers of the body of Christ that I believe we did vote these people in. I would say I did not, and many Christians did not, and we are to honor them. But I believe with all my heart, as I read Ezekiel, especially chapter 14, and then even the Lord took me to Isaiah 58, I believe there's great hope for the body of Christ.
Okay, thank you, Chrissy. And there's certainly hope, and our responsibility. Yes, we are to pray for leaders and those in authority over us. We also have that impact of being salt and being light. Salt has a preserving effect, and right now Bill, I believe there's an attack against this nation, and it's coming from within.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. And Yes, the heart of the rule of the king is in the hands of the Lord. There is no question about that. And so all of us have to have great faith that everything is being done the way it's supposed to be done. That doesn't in any way relieve us of our obligation to do what in our heart is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so in point of fact, it makes it more incumbent upon all of us to look inside, see what we feel is our role, what is the path that has been laid out for us, and then boldly and confidently walk down that path.
Thank you, Christy, for raising that point. A good one. Steve in Pasadena, California, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I want to thank your guest. I believe he answered a biblical, prophetic question that I've been chewing on for many years. As we're told by the Lord to watch and pray, we're to line up words in the Bible with words that we see today and somewhat complete the picture. I just want to bring out Jeremiah 51:57. It says, I will make drunk her princesses and her wise men, her captains and her rulers, her mighty men, and they shall sleep a perpetual sleep and not awake, saith the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. This is how God is going to deal with this great nation known as Mystery Babylon the Great.
Interesting comment. Thank you, Steve.
Very.
Let's see, tell you what, we're just seconds from a break, so what I'm going to do is we'll just delay the next call until after the break. Bill, take a moment, though, to tell us about your website where our listeners can stay informed on these issues.
Absolutely. People are invited to come to getliberty.org, and at getliberty.org there are pages on a wide range of subjects. There are portals to other sites, and then there are ways for people to get involved either on the national level or in their own state.
Again, folks, the website is getliberty.org. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Recently, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, a liberal foundation, put out a report in which they admitted that they were giving money to evangelicals for them to become a voice in pushing sustainable development. Well, for those of you who don't know, sustainable development came out of the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. Sustainable Development, or Agenda 21, is the framework for global governance. It includes abortion on demand, population control. It includes ending the Second Amendment rights of American citizens. It includes public housing, the expansion of the welfare state, the end of parental authority, the promotion of pagan spirituality in our schools, and much, much more. That's Sustainable Development. That's Agenda 21. And the Rockefeller Brothers Fund admits in their own document They're giving money to evangelical organizations and individuals for them to push this on the church. Now, you talk about a religious Trojan horse. That's a religious Trojan horse.
Oh, here is another news story that came out. The automatic spending cuts to the federal budget will take place March 1st unless it's prevented. The sequestration here could expose thousands of children to lead poisoning and other toxins, according to the Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Sean Donovan. I mean, we've got every cabinet level here that is putting out these horror stories, Bill, if the sequester takes place.
It's now getting funny. It is a Saturday Night Live skit. If these sequesters take place, hens will stop laying eggs and cows will stop giving milk. It's beyond comprehension how horrible this thing is.
We're going to Texas. Jacob, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I was watching a guy on Fox News, Greg Gutfeld, and he was saying that gutting the military and stalling our economy is the Sweet 16 of leftists. And if you look back at Barack Obama's mentors, from his mother and his father and his grandfather to Frank Marshall Davis and Cloward and Pivot and Saul Alinsky and all the others, Reverend Wright and Jim Wallace and all that.
Go right to your point.
They're all Marxists.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the plan, and if this cutting of the loophole that he's talking about, it's 3 days worth of spending. It's just 3 days, and this is so inconsequential that it's ridiculous. It will stall our military, and they've been wanting that for forever. I remember a couple of years ago they were talking about taxing war, and it's so insane. It's hilarious, really. But
Bill, let me get your comment, Bill, on what Jacob has said here.
No, he's right. I mean, look, every influence on Barack Obama's upbringing and life were Marxists, were hardcore leftists. And so it is not a surprise that is the type of policies this man ends up advocating. Now, he can put them in a smooth, nice, appealing wrapper, but it is what it is. And it is but I think the other point that Jacob made is most important here to think about, and that is that this is 3 days worth of government spending. Mm-hmm. We're not talking, all of these horrors you have these people talking about, and yet it doesn't even equal half a week of this government spending. So I think you have to take virtually everything they're saying with a grain of salt.
Excellent point. Thank you, Jacob. Jennifer in Florida, you're on the air.
Yes. Before I mentioned the 3 points that I had and everything, I was raised that is on raw cow's milk and in an environment where there was lead paint and one of 5 children, and we're all still living today, and that was
remarkable.
And we're in our late 50s and early 60s. Getting back to the 3 points so that I have. Number one, if the federal government wasn't involved in some of these budgets to begin with, and the 10th Amendment was really fully appreciated, most of these things...
Jennifer, I need to have you go real quickly because we have quite a buzz on your line here.
The next one is if the White House did not preserve the discretion set is over certain programs, and they all would be being cut. And number 3, if the federal workers whose pay is dependent upon these tax dollars had a reduction of 20%, which is 1/5 of their work week, then they would also have a reduction of their taxes as well and of the expenses connected with their work. And perhaps the church could do a ministry to those that are in their church that is to help to supply whatever extra needs that they had.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate you taking time to call. Let's go to Ron in Mansfield, Pennsylvania. You're on the air, Ron.
Hey, great program. And I am for sequestration. We need a meat cleaver to cut runaway spending. And when I heard the president say, we have an aircraft carrier that can't go to the Persian Gulf, and I say, great. Who else has an aircraft carrier there? We need to stop being the world's unpaid policeman.
Amen. A very interesting point, and this has not gotten much coverage, but Scott Rasmussen, the pollster, asked a national question about that very point. Do you think the United States should be the policeman to the world? And it only got 11% support. 72% of the people who surveyed said absolutely not. And of that 72%, 55% felt very strongly about it. And so they hold up our sons and daughters to us, and they say, we'll hurt them. They won't have equipment. We'll put them in harm's way, which is, when you think about it, about the lowest thing you could do, when in point of fact, they could save many times the amount of the sequester merely by pulling back and not being an empire, not being the world's policeman, but simply doing what the Constitution calls for, which is the common defense of the United States.
Got me is we're sending 200 Abrams tanks and 16 F-16s to Egypt.
That's right.
Well, why don't we keep them for our own defense and stay home?
Good point. Thank you, Ron. Our final call from Michigan. Gene, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, a lot of Christians have turned their back on Christ, and that's why he's doing this. It's a punishment. And just like the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years, they are being punished too because they didn't listen up. And there's punishment all the way around. That's why you have these big snowstorms and hurricanes and that. He's trying to wake up everybody.
Thank you, Gene. And I guess something that has borne out again, Bill, elections have consequences.
They most certainly do, and it isn't just turning out to vote. It's being smart about how you vote. And like I said earlier, I mean, remember, we've been asked so many times to pick between various forms of evil and, make a choice. Don't pick evil. Demand that you have a choice of voting for the right thing, for the good.
Again, folks, the number to your U.S. congressmen, they're on recess this week, and they'll be back in their offices. However, they do have staff there to take your phone calls at 202-225-3121, 225-3121, and at the Senate side, 224-3121. But keep in mind, many of them are holding town hall meetings this very week. Many are holding office hours within the district. Maybe you might make an appointment to go and talk with them one-on-one. Bill, thanks so much for being with us here today from Americans for Limited Government. And that website again?
Website is getliberty.org.
Well, thank you, Bill, for shedding some light on the truth here behind the sequester.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And, folks, thanks for joining us here today on Crosstalk. Again, their site is getliberty.org. And contact your congressmen, your senators. They're going to be dealing with this issue here next week as they reconvene, heading up to that date of March 1st. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.
220 years. In the 8 years from 2001 to 2009, when George Bush handed the government over to Barack Obama, he doubled the debt. We went from $5.5 trillion to $10 trillion in debt. And in 4 years of Barack Obama, we have gone from $10 trillion in debt to $16 trillion in debt, heading to 20. And so when you start to see that Bush doubled what had happened from 220 years prior, and that now Obama is on line to double that again, you come to an understanding of just how deeply in debt we have become and how we are on a line that, frankly, can only lead in a really bad really bad situation and crash.
Bill, you had mentioned a date of January 1st, and that date's come and gone. We keep hearing about things taking effect on March the 1st.
Right.
What's that discrepancy there?
Well, what happened was that as we hit the fiscal cliff in December, which was when the sequester was going to take place and all sorts of taxes were going to rise. And if you remember, we had this very, very difficult and contentious fight in December right up to Christmas. Part of that agreement was to kick the can down the road, to give a 2-month reprieve of the sequester to try and work things out again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they didn't really tell people is that on those 2 months, they just said, you know what, we're not going to cut spending on that. We're just going to forget about that. And we're going to spend as if there were no cuts. So you've already had 18%, or 2 months out of the year, of the cuts that had been promised the American people in exchange for the debt ceiling increase. You've already had them take that back.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, what you hear from the president is that, well, we can't possibly allow these to happen. It will be the end of the world as we know it.
Well, since the State of the Union address, I mean, the president repeatedly has been blaming Congress for passing the sequester, which Congress did. But wasn't this the president's idea? Isn't he the one that signed it into law?
Most certainly. Not only did he sign it into law, it was his idea. And we have that not from John Boehner or from any Republican. We have that from the Democratic chairman of the
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And welcome to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. My name is Jim Schneider. Thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, our nation is in a financial crisis, and this crisis is worsening every single day. Our national debt is in excess of $16.5 trillion, much more well beyond that when you really look at where we stand financially. That debt translates down to every U.S. citizen, every man, woman, and child. That's right, every child born into the world today is born holding an IOU to the federal government in the amount of $52,450. The debate continues in Congress over such things as the budget, the debt ceiling, and something called the sequester, which is due to take effect on March the 1st. Well, here to discuss the issue with us today is Bill Wilson. He's president of Americans for Limited Government. Their organization identifies, exposes, and works with Congress and state legislatures to prevent the continued expansion of government. Bill, thanks for joining us today here on Crosstalk.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I think it's important for us to just set a foundation for this sequester. Tell us exactly what is the sequester and what brought us to this point.
Sure. Back in August of 2011, Congress was debating, and there was a huge fight over whether or not to increase the debt ceiling, which is, in the most basic terms, it's the credit limit on the national credit card. And the president had asked for an additional $2.1 trillion in spending authority. There was a great deal of opposition to it, and the impasse was finally broken by an idea that came from the White House that the Republicans in the House and Senate accepted, which said that, okay, we're going to approve it in three steps, and we're going to take a couple of months and try to work out a deal. But if we can't work out a deal, then on January 1 of 2013, we are going to have automatically spending cuts that would total $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And that it would be half in defense and half in non-defense parts of government. And then they exempted Social Security and some others. I mean, interestingly, they exempted the welfare program Medicaid, but did not exempt Medicare for senior citizens. But that was it. And the thinking was that such cuts would be so draconian and so frightening that the politicians would agree to a deal. Well, as we all are aware, they didn't agree to anything, and they have been unable to really find a middle ground on how to deal with a truly out-of-control spending. And so here we are now at the sequester. And I think the first question that oftentimes you'll hear some of the president's supporters say, well, we don't really have a spending problem. So to put this all in perspective, from the beginning of the United States until the year 2000, when Bill Clinton handed the government over to George W. Bush, we had amassed a debt of about $5.5 trillion. Over that